Hi, Roy here, Yard of Random Books, and I'm going to do a tag. It's the Universes Collide tag, which was originated. It was originated by Mason in the Dark, and links below to the original video, which is really great. So it's about crossovers, adaptations from fictional universes, all of those things where characters get mixed up and put in places they don't belong, and all the fun that can be. And I'm an absolute sucker for this kind of stuff. So show me, Sherlock Holmes meets Dracula. I'm there for that. Big comics events where like all the characters are involved. Love all that stuff. As a teenager, when I knew that a Superman versus Spider-Man comic was coming out, that just blew my mind. The idea that characters from two different universes were going to meet that had completely different sort of operating systems. How could that even work? Superman is like thousands of times more powerful than Spider-Man. There's been no mention in every decades of comics have never mentioned the other characters. So what's going on? I almost couldn't sleep for excitement for that. So this sort of stuff appeals to me greatly. Right, into the prompts. First one, switch up. So this is about characters being swapped from the series or universe or genre they belong in into something else. So swap them over and see what happens. So I did think originally, maybe swap Jane Eyre and Tarzan, but the time differential didn't really work for me in the books. They're from different periods, so because you've got to have reality in this sort of thing, otherwise it all falls apart. You can't just make stuff up. Here's my switch up idea then. Sal Paradise, the fictionalized alter ego of Jack Kerouac, who appears in his novel On the Road, and also he has other names for himself in subsequent novels, but the fictional Jack Kerouac in his autobiography based novels, Sal Paradise swaps with Steve Rogers, Captain America. So they've got more in common than you might think. They're both patriots in a way. They certainly have a vision of America. So the swapping would mean Kerouac stroke Sal Paradise is a naval reservist. In our timeline, he doesn't even complete his training. But what if that rather rather insubordinate naval reservist was the one chosen to receive the super soldier serum? He becomes Captain America, flag uniform, goes into the theatres of war, has all those adventures. Then we would get the accounts of like battling the Red Skull, etc., would be written in Kerouac's spontaneous prose way of writing, which could be really exciting. And then after the war, who knows? Would a superhero version of Kerouac, for one thing, it would cure his alcoholism, because it seems to be canon that Cap can't get drunk. So his life would take a different kind of path. Meanwhile, Steve Rogers, staying puny, he has to live the Kerouac life, wandering America, hitchhiking, jumping onto freight trains, hanging out with poets and writers like William Burroughs. Now, what he'd make of all those people, who knows? Clearly, Rogers is more of a straight arrow than Kerouac, but throw him into the situations, we will see. So that's my swap: Sal Paradise and Steve Rogers. Next prompt, V for villainy. So we're looking at taking villains and giving them their own story, and I quite like this sort of stuff. The books of Kim Newman books about Moriarty, for instance, great. Now, I very much doubt whether in our lifetimes the Tolkien estate will allow anybody to write further books set in Middle Earth. And if they do, they'll probably try and do it in a really classy, high-end way. But let's say they didn't take that approach, and people were writing all sorts of stuff in the franchise. How about a novel from the point of view of Saruman that gives his perspective, and maybe you end up being more sympathetic to him? It's been done with, say, Dracula. It could work. I don't think he just wants to be evil for evil's sake. He probably thinks he's being progressive and doing things that make sense. So Saruman novel. I'm saying Saruman rather than Sauron because Sauron's more abstract and kind of you know total. I can't really see him having an interior life that would be very interesting to read about. But Saruman, on the other hand, there's a progression. He starts out, he's hanging out with Gandalf, it's all cool, and then of course we end up with the bits we know. So that would be my first person Saruman story. Um, right, prompt 3 is about an adaptation, so it's a novelization we would like to see. Well, I'd like to see a novelisation of the board game Talisman. So this was a Games Workshop game, came out in the 90s. The edition we had was the second edition, and it's a fantastic game. It's a it doesn't it's not a skirmish game. It's not a role playing game. It's a proper board game, but pure fantasy tropes, like all of them. So all sorts of fantasy characters. You work your way through these fantasy landscapes, and it's card based, so you're encountering all kinds of threats, monsters, etc. Plus picking up magical objects and trying to hold on to them. And there's some really neat gameplay, all of which would make a fantastic book. Well, it would make an interesting book. I think I would want the author to be instructed. They have to involve all the characters, and the plot has to be playable. It ends up so whoever gets to the middle first has this massive load of power, and he then has to smite all the other characters who desperately try to depose him or her, which sometimes happens. So there's a kind of the spectacular ending, almost guaranteed. Plus weird stuff like, I don't know, sort of a zombie becoming an emperor, things like that. So yes, Talisman. Not sure whether we'd require them to do the add-on sets. I think there was a dungeon and a city and something else. But certainly the main game, with some possibilities of sequels, held out afterwards. So that would be my adaptation. Lots of other games could be fun to adapt, I suppose, into a novel. I can't quite see Carcassonne the novel, sort of, you have annexed my sheep. Not sure how that would work. But, right, let's look at a crossover between two universes. Okay, so the universes I'm going to pick are the universe of the Royal Christmas romance movies, talking about films like the Christmas Prince series, the Princess Switch series, and a cluster of others. And they're not just similar in style and content, they actively have made themselves into a universe by having cameos from different films showing up in each other's films, and things like the made up countries being mentioned, and there's even a glimpse of a map in one of them. So that is a universe deliberately built as a universe. And like I say, it's got these non-existent European countries in it, like Aldovia and Genovia, and it's like, well, where are they? So that world mashing up with the Universal Monsters series. So Universal Studios, starting with Dracula in 1931, moving through to the films they had where the monsters meet Abbott and Costello. Along the way, you get Frankenstein, Wolfman, Mummy, and some others you could arguably include. So that, because some of them meet each other, is also a universe, and it also has a strangely a Europe with strange geography, shifting geography, and geography that's hard to pin down. It's also very hard to pin down the timelines for the way that world works. But I think they could interact quite well. You know, the monsters would probably relish the having these the countries you get in the royal romances, which seem to be filled with rather doltish characters. You know, if Dracula was excited about moving to England to prey on the teeming millions, he'd be ecstatic to move to Aldovia and you know be made forevermore. Plus, as a nobleman with a castle, if he hacks the logic of that universe, he could be marrying feisty hairdressers and maids coming across from America within 90 minutes on a regular basis, because that you know that's just the way it works. So it would work. It worked for the monsters. Also, the royal romances, you've usually got a an unhappy like cousin or rival for the throne or something. They would easily be seduced into doing evil things like, you know, vampirism, lycanthropy, importing a mummy, all of that sort of stuff. Looking at it from another way, the households of these royal setups, where you have some sort of nobleman who to, becomes at some point a sort of social reformer with the feisty American partner, and there's usually some kind of wise counselor as well, like a governess or a prime minister or something. Well, they'd make great kind of Scooby gangs to be fighting the monsters from the universal world. Right, final prompt, tonal shift. So, is this a genre? Yes, it is, I think. Okay, so cast your mind back to the early 60s when the James Bond films started being made. Imagine if the franchise for those had not gone to the studios it went to, but instead went to Hammer Films. Hammer, who had in 1958 relaunched the sort of horror series with their Dracula, their Frankenstein, their Mummy, and brought in these kind of sex violence shows. Them taking on James Bond in that style and with Hammer budgets rather than the James Bond budgets, I think that could be really interesting. You'd probably get Christopher Lee as Bond, can't argue with that. But I think, you know, in terms of different tone, for a start, the blood would be redder. The way that the way the sort of sex and violence was handled probably different, and probably also you'd have a series of films that somehow are also all filmed in the same place, slightly swapped around for each movie. I think that would be awesome. So yeah, tonal shift. That's the fifth prompt. That's universes colliding from my perspective, and I will be back in a second to tag some people. Okay, here come the tags. I'm gonna tag Cinephil and Michael K. Vaughan and Jesse at Bartle's Bookshelf. So, hope you haven't done it before. I know the tag's been around for like a year or something, but if you want to do it, fantastic, obviously, or anybody else. That's me. Crossover time is finished for today. Back in a bit with something